The silence of the phalanx was the most terrifying thing. It was not the absence of sound, but the negation of it. A creeping void that consumed worlds, not with the roar of explosions or the shriek of dying stars, but with the chilling hush of conversion. On 1,000 worlds across the Perseus arm, life was ceasing to be. It did not die. It was remade. Flesh, stone, and steel were transmuted into the iridescent, crystalline structures of the Phalanx Collective, a silent, glittering cancer spreading through the galaxy. The Galactic Concord, a coalition of empires so ancient they measured their histories in geological epochs, was paralyzed. In the grand rotunda on the capital world of Xylos, delegates debated. They formed committees, drafted resolutions, and sanctioned trade embargoes against the void itself, all while the light of entire star systems winked out on their tactical displays. They were a civilization dying of procedure. Lyra of the Cathar, a junior archivist in the Concord's vaunted halls of record, felt this decay in her very bones. Her people were pragmatists, historians who believed the past was a weapon to be wielded against the follies of the present. Yet here she was, cataloging trade disputes from a forgotten century, while the present was being methodically erased. She watched the news feeds, saw the crystalline lattices encasing moons, the refugee ships that arrived with holds full of silent, traumatized survivors who could only whisper of the beautiful, terrible silence. The Concord's fleets were useless. Their plasma cannons and kinetic strikers impacted the phalanx structures with no more effect than throwing pebbles against a mountain. The crystal would simply ripple, absorb the energy, then continue its inexorable, silent growth. The Concord's greatest admirals had learned to fear that silence, for it was the sound of their own irrelevance. The breaking point came in the Erebus sector, a region of space long declared void and impassable. The Concord had designated it a navigational hazard for millennia, a place where space-time was pathologically warped, a cosmic scar from a war so ancient none remembered its cause. It was a dead zone, a place of ghosts. But the Phalanx, driven by an instinct beyond the comprehension of organic life, were drawn to it. A conversion wave of unprecedented scale, a shimmering tsunami of crystalline energy, surged toward the heart of the anomaly. The Concord's 7th Fleet, the pride of the ruling El-Shari Dominion, was sent to intercept, not with any hope of victory, but as a sacrifice to buy time. For 3 rotations, they held the line, their ships being slowly, silently encased in crystal until they became glittering monuments to their own futility. It was on the 4th rotation that the galaxy changed. As the phalanx wave struck the very heart of the Erebus anomaly, reality itself screamed. The dead zone, the stable warp of space-time, did not break. It shattered, a fissure of non-light, a tear in the fabric of existence, ripped open, and from it bled an energy signature so ancient and so violent that it overloaded every sensor in the sector. The phalanx wave recoiled, its silent advance broken for the first time in recorded history. The surviving ships of the 7th Fleet, their crews blinded and their systems fried, could only register a single, impossible object emerging from the rift. It was not a ship in any conventional sense. It was a shard of primordial night, a fortress moon carved from obsidian and rage. Its surface a geography of battle scars so deep they looked like canyons. It was impossibly vast, a brutalist monolith that absorbed the light of the nearby stars, and from its angular, weapon-pocked hull, it broadcast a single, repeating signal in a language of pure mathematics, a signal that spoke of universal constants and the cold, hard logic of physics. It was a declaration not of intent, but of existence. It said, Simply, I am, inside that monolith, in a chamber that had known only the hum of life support and the patient vigil of an artificial mind for 10,000 years. Kalen's world returned in a torrent of ice and fire. The cryo-fluid drained away, and the neural link that had held his consciousness in a dreamless sea of memory released him with a jolt that felt like being born and dying in the same instant. He gasped, his lungs burning with the first real breath he had taken since his civilization had fallen. He was the last High Archivist, the last son of the Terran Directorate, the last human. Before him, the air shimmered and coalesced into a figure of pure data, the calm, unwavering visage of the Orcs Warden AI. "Good morning, Archivist Kalen," the Warden spoke, its voice a symphony of a billion harmonized calculations. "The long vigil is over. The temporal stasis field has collapsed. Time has elapsed 10,152 standard galactic cycles." Kalen stumbled from the cryopod, his muscles screaming in protest, his mind reeling. He was not a warrior or a statesman. He was a keeper of stories, a man who had been chosen not for his strength, but for his memory. He remembered Earth. He remembered the green hills of his home, the roar of the oceans, the faces of his family. He remembered the Covenant, the sacred pact their ancestors had forged with the fledgling races of the galaxy, a promise to stand as their protectors, their shield against the horrors of the void. And he remembered the betrayal. He remembered the distress calls going unanswered, the allies who sealed their borders, the silence that greeted their pleas as their worlds burned. He remembered being placed into this pod, the last hope of a dying race, aboard their greatest and most terrible creation, the Archship Vengeance. "Warden," Kalen rasped, his voice raw. "Status." The Warden's form shifted, the chamber walls melting away into a real-time view of the space outside. "The conditions of the last directive have been met," the AI stated, its voice devoid of emotion. "The Covenant has been broken. The civilizations of the Concord have enjoyed 10 millennia of prosperity built upon our sacrifice. We have been awakened by the emergence of a new existential threat, designated Phalanx. Your orders." Archivist Kalen looked at the star-dusted abyss, at the shimmering, crystalline horror of the Phalanx, and at the broken, glittering ships of a conquered fleet. He was a historian, a man of peace, but he was also the sole inheritor of a species' righteous fury. He held within him the memories of a trillion souls screaming for justice. His duty was not to his own conscience, but to theirs. "Execute the directive," he whispered, the words feeling alien on his tongue. "Assess their capabilities, and then cleanse the board." The commander of the El Shari cruiser Starfire's Vigil was trying to coax his sensor array back to life when the human arc moved. It did not accelerate with the familiar flare of thrusters or the shimmer of a drive field. It simply shifted its position in space, moving with a ponderous, absolute certainty that defied physics as he knew it. It positioned itself between the broken Concord line and the recoiling Phalanx wave. For a long moment, nothing happened. The arc just sat there, a hole in reality, silent and menacing. The Phalanx, perhaps sensing a power that dwarfed its own, began to coalesce, its crystalline structures forming a massive, spear-like projection aimed at the heart of the vessel. From the bridge of the Vengeance, Kalen watched the tactical display. The Warden, whom he had named Legion in his mind for the multitude it represented, analyzed the threat. Phalanx energy signature is coalescing for a focused psychic matter conversion event, Legion reported calmly. Estimated yield will exceed the output of a core nova. Recommend preemptive sterilization. Kalen's hand trembled as he rested it on the command throne. He was about to order the destruction of an entire world. The planet the Phalanx were consuming. Cygnus X1 was a Concord garden world. Billions had lived there before the silence fell. Now it was just another crystalline tomb. Or perhaps there were survivors. Perhaps there was hope. "Legion," he began, his voice hesitant. "Is there any way to—" The AI's glowing visage turned to him. "The last directive is absolute. Archivist, we are not saviors. We are consequence." Kalen closed his eyes, the faces of his long-dead family flashing in his mind. They had been betrayed, forgotten, left to die. These conquered races, these El-Shari and Cathar and 100 others, had built their empire on the ashes of humanity's tomb. There was no room for mercy. "Proceed," he commanded. The Ark answered. A section of its midnight dark hull slid open, but no weapon emerged. Instead, there was only a deeper blackness, a circle of absolute nothing. Then, from that nothing, a sliver of impossibility shot forth. It wasn't a beam of light or a projectile. It was a line of distorted space, a focused thread of gravitational force that connected the Ark to the phalanx-infested planet. For a single silent moment, the world of Cygnus X1 simply folded. Space and time warped around it as it was crushed into an infinitely dense point. The planet, its crystalline shell, and the entire phalanx fleet coalescing around it were pulled into a man-made singularity that winked out of existence as quickly as it had appeared. There was no explosion, no flash of light, just absence. A world and its destroyers had been deleted from reality. The shock wave that followed was not of energy, but of pure gravitational force. It tore through the remaining conquered ships, ripping the Starfire's vigil in half and sending the rest tumbling end over end. The Ark, the Vengeance, remained utterly unmoved, its silence more profound and more terrifying than the silent plague it had just effortlessly erased. The reports that limped back to the conquered capital of Xylos were incoherent, the ravings of traumatized crews. They spoke of a ghost that devoured a planet, a weapon that killed with gravity, a ship the size of a moon that bore the scars of a forgotten age. But for Lyra, sequestered deep within the Concord archives, the fragmented data streams painted a different picture. The energy signature from the Erebus anomaly, the mathematical purity of the broadcast signal, the very description of the brutalist, moon-sized vessel, it all resonated with the forbidden lore she had secretly been studying. Tales of the Wardens, a mythical race of protectors from the dawn of time. She cross-referenced the data with a heavily redacted file sealed under the Concord's founding charter, a file labeled only Exile Protocol. Her claws trembled as she bypassed the security protocols, the system screaming warnings at her. Inside, she found a single, grainy image, millennia old. It was a star chart, but one of a galaxy she barely recognized. And at its center was a vibrant, blue-white star system labeled with a single, archaic word, Sol. Next to it was a faded schematic of a ship class designated World Ender. It was a perfect match for the vessel from the Erebus sector. The legends were real, the myths were history. The Wardens, the protectors the Conquered had tried so hard to forget, had a name. The file called them humans. As Lyra stared at the screen, her blood running cold, a horrifying realization dawned. The Conquered had not been founded in an empty galaxy. It had been built on a throne that was never truly vacant. On the bridge of the Vengeance. Kalen watched the scattered remnants of the Concord fleet flee. Legion projected a new star chart before him. The heart of the Perseus arm laid bare. Red icons pulsed over key Concord systems, military hubs, and capital worlds. The first target on the list glowed with a malevolent intensity. It was Xylos, the seat of the very government whose ancestors had watched humanity die. The board is cleansed. Archivist. Legion stated, its voice echoing in the silent command center, and now, we begin the game. Kalen did not feel triumph. He did not feel hatred. He felt only the immense, crushing weight of a promise made 10,000 years ago, a promise of retribution that he, a lonely historian, was now bound to keep. He was the ghost of a murdered people, and the galaxy would soon learn to fear its own past. The news of the Erebus event arrived on Xylos not as a coherent report, but as a psychic scream that echoed through the Concord's hyper-relay network. The initial dispatches were a chaotic jumble of corrupted data, panicked voice logs, and sensor ghosts that spoke of impossible physics. In the Grand Rotunda, where policy was shaped by centuries of deliberate, glacial consensus, panic was a foreign language. High Counselor Valerius of the El-Shari, a being whose lineage was a meticulously curated document stretching back 500 generations, dismissed the early accounts with a wave of his slender, four-fingered hand. Hysteria, he declared to the assembled delegates, his voice a calming balm of aristocratic certainty. The Erebus anomaly is known to induce sensor psychosis. The Seventh Fleet likely encountered a natural phenomenon, and their AI combat predictors have confabulated a hostile entity. But the hysteria did not subside. It solidified into hard, terrifying fact. The entire system of Cygnus X1 had vanished from stellar charts. Its gravitational signature simply gone. The surviving ships of the Seventh Fleet, now quarantined in the outer system, sent back telemetry that made physicists weep. And then came the clear astrogation data, watching the trajectory of the object, the entity that had emerged from the anomaly. Its destination was unmistakable. It was coming directly, and with impossible speed, for Xylos. The rotunda's calm shattered. Delegates shouted over one another, ancient rivalries flaring in the face of a common, incomprehensible threat. Valerius's composure remained a mask of perfect porcelain, but a vein pulsed in his temple. This was not a barbarian horde or a rival empire. This was an unknown, a violation of the ordered, predictable galaxy he and his ancestors had so carefully managed. It was an insult, deep beneath the gilded spires of the capital, in the silent, climate-controlled catacombs of the Concord archives. Lyra felt the truth like a physical weight in her chest. The file exile protocol burned in her mind. The wardens, the humans, the schematic of the World Ender-class Arc ship. It was all there, a crime buried under 10 millennia of galactic peace. She knew Valerius and the High Council would never admit to this. They would brand the approaching vessel a monster, an invader, and rally the conquered to a war they could not possibly win. The lie was the foundation of their entire civilization. To confess it now would be to confess that their peace was a sham, their prosperity stolen. The past was a weapon, her people believed, and if the Concord leadership would not wield it for the truth, then she would, working in the dead hours of the system's night cycle, her claws moving with frantic precision over the holographic interface. She began the most dangerous act of her life. She copied the entirety of the Exile Protocol file, its damning records of ignored distress calls, its charts of the Terran Directorate's slow, agonizing collapse, its final, chilling entry subject race human, status extinct, Covenant Protocol terminated, Galactic record sealed. She encrypted the data into a cascading mimetic virus, designed to lie dormant until triggered by a specific energy signature, the unique, archaic frequency she had detected from the human broadcast in the Erebus sector. She could not transmit it herself. Every outbound signal from the archives was monitored, but she could embed it into the public network. A digital time bomb waiting for the right spark. She routed it through 1,000 layers of obfuscation, a desperate prayer to the ghosts of history. If the humans were coming to deliver a message, she would make damn sure the entire galaxy was ready to receive it. As she completed the final line of code, the internal security alarm shrieked. She had been discovered. Aboard the Vengeance, Kaylin walked through a ghost. The Ark's vast interior contained entire simulated ecosystems, memory archives given physical form. He now stood in a perfect recreation of Geneva, the last capital of the Terran Directorate, in the final hour before its fall. The sky above the simulated lake was a beautiful, terrifying tapestry of orbital weapons fire. Holographic figures ran past him, their faces masks of terror, their unheard screams a silent chorus in his mind. He was the only solid thing in a world of frantic light. Legion appeared beside him, its data form a calm pillar amidst the chaos. These memories are unproductive, archivist. It stated, they serve only to introduce emotional variables into your command decisions. Kaylin watched a holographic mother shield her child as a lance of plasma fire erased a distant skyscraper. She is not a variable. Legion, he said, his voice thick with an ancient sorrow. She is the reason for the directive. I need to remember why we are doing this. It cannot just be for vengeance. Legion's form shimmered. Vengeance is the application of a past grievance to a present action. Justice is the balancing of a scale. The last directive is neither. It is a mathematical certainty. An equation was created 10,000 years ago, our survival in exchange for our protection. They broke the equation. We are the correction. The simulation faded, replaced by the stark, silent bridge of the Vengeance. Before them, on the main view screen, a jewel of a world swam in the void, a swirl of blue, green, and white. Xylos. We have arrived. Archivist. Legion announced. The Concord Home Fleet is assuming a defensive posture. 2,400 capital-class vessels. 12,000 support craft. Their theoretical maximum firepower is considerable. Kaylin looked at the swarm of ships, a glittering cloud of hornets protecting their nest. They looked magnificent, powerful, the culmination of 10 millennia of progress. He felt a pang of regret, historian sadness for the knowledge about to be lost. Then he remembered Geneva. Legion. He commanded, his voice hardening into steel. Open a universal channel. Broadcast the contents of the Exile Protocol file. Priority Alpha. Let them hear the truth they tried to bury. Let them hear the voices of the dead. The message arrived without warning. On every public screen, on every private data pad, in every military command center across the Xylo system, the curated feed of Concord news was torn away, replaced by a single, stark sigil, a stylized bird of prey clutching a lightning bolt, the ancient crest of the Terran Directorate. Then came the voices, desperate, pleading voices speaking in archaic form of Galactic Standard, their words overlaid with translated subtitles. This is High Chancellor Evander of Terra to any vessel of the Cathar hegemony. Our colonies in the Tau Ceti sector are overrun. The Covenant must be honored. Please, we are dying. A pause. Then another voice. Mayday. This is the defense platform at Alpha Centauri. The El Shari fleets have sealed their borders. They are not responding. We are alone. The broadcast was a cascade of final messages, a litany of betrayal. It showed the star charts, the sealed orders, the callous, dismissive replies from the very races that now form the core of the Concord Council. And then, the cacophony of the dying faded, replaced by a single, calm, resonant voice that spoke in perfect, modern galactic standard. It was Kalen's voice. "I am Kalen, High Archivist of the Terran Directorate. I am the last human. You live in a galaxy built upon our graves. You call our sacrifice peace. You call our extinction a myth. Today, your myth has returned to deliver your history." On the bridge of his flagship, the Indomitable Will, High Counselor Valerius watched in disbelief. His face a mask of cold fury. Propaganda, he roared. Lies and fabrications jam that signal now. His communications officers worked frantically, but it was useless. The human signal was broadcasting on every frequency at once, its strength overwhelming their systems. It was as if the very fabric of space was speaking. The message was spreading. Throughout the fleet, Valerius could feel the hesitation, the uncertainty, the names, the dates, the sealed protocols. They were too specific to be a simple fabrication. He was losing control. The foundation of his authority, the unquestionable righteousness of the conquered, was cracking. He would not allow it. He would erase this ghost from existence, and then erase its message from history. "All ships," he commanded, his voice a blade of ice cutting through the chaos. "Target the hostile vessel. Fire on my mark. Annihilate it." The conquered home fleet responded as one, a wave of shimmering energy, a tsunami of plasma, lasers, and kinetic rounds erupted from thousands of warships, converging on the lone, black Arc ship. It was a beautiful and terrible sight. Enough firepower to crack a continent, to boil an ocean. From the bridge of the Vengeance, Kalen watched the approaching storm of destruction without flinching. He had seen this all before, in the dying memories of his people. "Legion," he said softly. "It's time." The Ark did not raise shields. It did not maneuver. As the wave of energy was about to strike, the space around the Vengeance simply warped. A gravity well of impossible intensity formed, not pulling the energy in, but folding space-time over itself. The entire conquered salva, a torrent of world-breaking power, vanished into a non-dimension, its fury utterly negated. A stunned silence fell over the bridges of the Concord fleet. They had fired their greatest weapon, and it had simply disappeared. Before they could process what had happened, the Vengeance replied. From apertures that opened like obsidian wounds along its hull, it released a swarm of objects, not missiles or drones, but something else entirely. They were small, no larger than fighter craft, and they moved with an erratic, unpredictable grace, phasing in and out of local reality. They were the hounds of the Directorate. The phase drones passed through the Concord's energy shields as if they were not there. They ignored hulls and armor, phasing directly into the hearts of the warships, into their reactor cores and bridge sections. Then they rematerialized. The result was not an explosion, but a localized atomic failure. On the bridge of the Indomitable Will, Valerius watched in horror as his fleet began to die. One moment, a proud Elshari dreadnought was a beacon of power. The next, its center simply ceased to exist, and the ship tore itself apart under its own structural stress. There were no fireballs, no spectacular detonations, just ships silently, gracefully, coming apart at the seams. It was not a battle. It was a disassembly. The Great Concord Home Fleet, the symbol of galactic order for 10,000 years, was being systematically dismantled, piece by silent piece. The death of the Concord Home Fleet was an exercise in silent, geometric precision. On the bridge of the Indomitable Will, High Counselor Valerius watched his armada come apart, not with the chaotic fury of battle, but with the cold, deliberate efficiency of a deconstruction crew. The hounds of the Directorate were not weapons of war in the traditional sense. They were instruments of unmaking. They left no scorch marks, no plasma blooms, only the silent, blossoming ruin of ships peeling open like metallic flowers. His tactical display was a field of dying embers, green icons of operational warships winking out one by one, replaced by the stark red symbols of catastrophic failure. The human broadcast continued to loop on a secondary screen, the voices of the dead a mocking chorus to his failure. His legacy, the 500-generation legacy of his house, was being erased in the space of minutes. Rage, pure and undiluted, burned away his aristocratic composure, leaving only the primal instinct of a cornered predator. He would not be remembered as the counselor who presided over the Concord's greatest humiliation. If he was to die, he would die in defiance, and his defiance would be a scar on the face of this human ghost. "Helm, all power to the primary engines," he commanded, his voice a low growl that resonated through the deck plates. "Ramming speed. Target the center of that monstrosity." The helmsman, a young El-Shari whose face was a pale mask of terror, hesitated for a fraction of a second. "But, Counselor, our shields are failing." "The hounds!" Valerius turned, his eyes blazing with a fanatic's light. "I gave you an order, Lieutenant. Or would you rather wait here to be taken apart like a child's toy?" The command was relayed. The indomitable will, the mightiest dreadnought ever constructed by the Conquered, a vessel that had pacified rebellions and enforced the peace of 1,000 worlds, turned its nose toward the Ark ship Vengeance. Its engines flared with the light of a captive star, and it began its final desperate charge across the void. Kalen watched the approaching dreadnought on the main view screen. It was a magnificent, suicidal gesture. "The lead vessel is accelerating," Legion stated, its tone unchanged. "Collision in 90 seconds. They have diverted all power from weapons and shields to their engines. Their intent is clear. Shall I deploy a Gravtic shear? A shear would slice the ship in two as easily as a knife through parchment. It would be efficient. It would be easy." But Kalen looked at the approaching ship, at this final act of defiance, and he saw not an enemy, but a symbol. This was the pride of the Conquered, its indomitable will made manifest in steel and fire. To simply destroy it would be to prove its point, to become the mindless monster they believed him to be. He wanted to break their will, not just their ships. "No, Legion," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I want him. I want the one who gave that order. Isolate the vessel. Take it." Legion's glowing form tilted, a gesture of simulated inquiry. "Clarify. Take. Archivist." Kalen's gaze was locked on the charging dreadnought. "I don't want it destroyed. I want it captured, intact, paralyzed, a monument to its own futility. Use the stasis webs." For the first time in their interaction, a fractional pause registered in Legion's response time. The stasis webs are a containment tool. Archivist, not a weapon. Their use against a vessel of this mass at this velocity is unconventional. "Then we shall be unconventional," Kalen replied. From the underside of the Vengeance, a series of emitters glowed with a faint blue light. They did not fire a beam or projectile. Instead, they projected a complex, interlocking field of localized temporal distortion. The space between the Ark and the indomitable will began to thicken, to congeal. Valerius, on his bridge, felt it first as a strange, viscous drag. The ship began to slow, its engines screaming as they fought against a force that was not kinetic, but temporal. Time itself was becoming a barrier. The stars outside the viewport began to distort, their light smearing into streaks of red and blue. On the deck, crew members froze in mid-stride, caught in pockets of slowed time. Valerius watched, his rage turning to a new, more profound horror, as his unstoppable charge slowed to a crawl, then to a dead stop, suspended in a web of frozen time less than a kilometer from the Ark's silent hull. The indomitable will was no longer a weapon. It was a museum piece. On Xylos, the sky was beginning to weep fire. The debris of the home fleet, caught in the planet's gravity, was streaking through the upper atmosphere, a beautiful, terrible rain of falling stars that were once the protectors of the realm. Panic had consumed the capital city. The government was in full collapse. Delegates who had debated galactic policy hours before were now stampeding for private shuttles, trampling each other in a desperate bid to escape. The Concord, an institution built on 10,000 years of perceived stability, had dissolved in under an hour. In a sub-level detention center beneath the halls of record, Lyra heard the distant screams and the percussive thud of atmospheric impacts. She was shackled to a cold metal chair, the light of an interrogation node glaring in her eyes. Across from her sat a Cathar prelate of the Concord's internal security, a grizzled old male named Vorlag, whose carapace was scarred with the marks of a dozen pacification campaigns. He was a true believer. "You have committed treason of a kind we have not seen since the founding," Vorlag rasped, his voice a low growl of sanctimonious fury. "You have given aid to an unknown hostile, undermined the morale of the fleet, and slandered the memory of our ancestors." Lyra met his gaze, her own fear a cold knot in her stomach, but her voice was steady. "I did not slander them. I quoted them. The hostile you speak of is the ghost you created." Vorlag slammed a heavy claw on the table between them. "Lies, doctored records meant to sow chaos. Then why are we losing Lyra?" Shot back. "If they are just barbarians, why is our sky filled with the wreckage of our greatest fleet? The truth is out there. Prelate, you can kill me, but you can no longer contain it." A tremor shook the entire facility, and the lights flickered. Vorlag's mandibles twitched at a sign of deep-seated anxiety. He had seen the broadcast. He had seen the impossible ease with which their fleet had been annihilated. A seed of doubt, small and poisonous, was growing in the bedrock of his faith. He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "There is still time to mitigate the damage you have done. Tell me how you did it. Who were your contacts? How did you access a sealed founder's file?" Lyra simply smiled, a sad, defiant gesture. "I am an archivist," she said. "The past is my weapon. And it appears yours has just been turned against you. Aboard the Vengeance, the battle was over. The space around Xylos was clear, save for the captured dreadnought and the drifting, silent hulks of the dead." Kalen watched the planet on the view screen. It was a world in chaos. Legion's data streams painted a picture of societal breakdown, riots, and martial law being declared by a government that no longer truly existed. The path was clear. The last directive was explicit on this point: decapitate the leadership, sterilize the military infrastructure, and impose order. "The planetary defense grid is offline," Legion reported. "The government is in disarray. We can begin orbital purification and deploy pacification drones to the surface. The Concorde will be functionally non-existent within 12 hours. Kalen felt a cold dread at the words. Orbital purification. It was a sterile, clinical term for mass murder. He had come for justice for the leaders who had betrayed his people. But what of the billions on the surface? The civilians, the workers, the children? What of the archivist who had risked everything to release the truth? He found he could not give the order. Legion, he said, turning away from the view of the burning sky. That data leak, the copy of the exile protocol that was broadcast from the planet's surface just before our arrival. Can you trace its point of origin? Legion's form pulsed with light. Of course. Archivist. The signal originated from a high-security node within the conquered Central Archives. The individual who sent it was identified and apprehended by local security forces approximately 37 minutes ago. She is a Cathar female, a junior archivist named Lyra. She is currently being held in a sub-level detention facility. Her life signs are stable, but elevated. Kalen stared at the AI, a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts in his mind. An archivist, like him, someone who believed in the power of history, who had sought the truth even at the cost of her own life. She was not his enemy. She was, perhaps, the only soul in this entire system who understood why he was here. The directive demanded purification. His conscience, the ghost of the historian he once was, demanded something else. The counselor who commanded that fleet, Valerius. He is on that captured dreadnought. Is he not? Kalen asked. Affirmative. Legion replied. He is alive and contained on the bridge. Kalen took a deep breath. The first truly decisive breath he had taken since waking from his long sleep. He was the last human. The directive was his guide, not his master. He would write a new chapter. Legion, he commanded, his voice ringing with an authority he did not know he possessed. Scramble 2 teams, your toys. I want a surgical strike on that detention facility. Bring me the archivist, Lyra, unharmed. And I want a boarding party for the indomitable Will. Bring me High Counselor Valerius. He and I have a history lesson to discuss, face to face. The response of the Archship Vengeance was not the thunder of a planetary invasion, but the whisper of a ghost passing through walls. 2 phantoms, smaller, sleeker versions of the Hounds, detached from the main vessel and descended through Xylos's burning atmosphere. They moved without thermal signature, without kinetic disturbance, their phase drives rendering them invisible to the panicked, failing planetary sensor grid. 1 phantom slipped through the bedrock and reinforced plasteel of the archives as if it were mist, solidifying in the corridor outside Lyra's detention cell. Her guards, 2 burly Cathar prelates, didn't even have time to register a threat before their nerve clusters were hit with targeted sonic pulses, causing them to slump to the ground in a state of instant, harmless paralysis. The cell door dissolved into shimmering particles. Lyra flinched back as 2 figures stepped through the opening. They were not the monsters of conquered propaganda. They were humanoid, encased in sleek, form-fitting armor the color of a starless midnight, their faces obscured by polarized visors. They moved with a liquid grace that was utterly unnerving. One raised a hand, not in a threatening gesture, but a calming one. A synthesized voice spoke. Is so. Calm and genderless, echoed in the small room. Archivist Lyra. You are being liberated by the authority of the Terran Directorate. Do not be alarmed. We are here to ensure your safety. Liberation. The word was so absurd, so impossible, that Lyra could only stare in stunned silence as the second figure knelt and, with a touch of a device to her shackles, caused them to fall away with a soft click. Simultaneously, miles above in the cold, silent void, the second phantom phased through the hull of the temporally frozen indomitable Will. It materialized on the bridge, a place of suspended chaos. Crew members were frozen in place, their faces masks of horror and exertion. Shards of a shattered console hung motionless in the air. Only High Counselor Valerius at the very epicenter of the stasis field, remained conscious, though unable to move, his eyes wide with impotent fury. The two human soldiers moved through the tableau of frozen time like gods walking through a mortal's nightmare. They ignored the frozen guards. Approaching Valerius directly, a device was placed on his neck, and the localized field holding him rigid dissolved. He gasped, stumbling forward, the blood returning to his limbs. He looked up at the faceless soldiers, his aristocratic features contorted into a sneer of defiance. "So, the vermin have come to gloat," he spat. "Kill me and be done with it. I will not be your prisoner." The lead soldier's helmet tilted slightly. "Death is a mercy, High Counselor," the synthesized voice replied, its placid tone more chilling than any threat. "You have not earned it. Your presence is required by the High Archivist." Before Valerius could utter another retort, the soldier's hand shot out, not with a weapon, but with a pressure point injector that touched his neck. Valerius's world went black. He, the most powerful being in the Concord, was dispatched with the casual efficiency one might use on a seditious animal. He awoke moments later, the telltale disorientation of a short-range teleporter fading, to find himself standing on cold, dark metal. The air was sterile, the lighting dim. Before him stood his captors, their helmets now retracted, revealing the faces of the myth. They were unremarkable. A man and a woman, their features sharp, their expressions disciplined and unreadable. But it was the chamber they were in that stole his breath. He was on the bridge of the human arc ship, and through a vast viewport, he saw the ruin of his fleet and the wounded glow of his home world. Lyra's journey was a disorienting blur of silent corridors and grav lifts. The interior of the Ark was not opulent like a Concorde vessel. It was stark, functional, and ancient. The walls seemed to hum with a power so old it felt like a geological force. She was not treated as a prisoner, but as a guest, albeit a heavily escorted one. Her guides remained silent until they reached a vast, circular chamber. The view was the same one that greeted Valerius, a panoramic vista of his defeat. In the center of the room, standing before a raised command throne, was another human. He was older than her escorts, his face etched with a weariness that seemed to transcend time. But his eyes burned with a fierce, intelligent light. He was dressed not in armor, but in the simple, dark robes of a scholar. He turned as she entered, his gaze analytical, almost sympathetic. "Archivist Lyra," he said, his voice the same one from the broadcast, calm and resonant. "I am Kalen. I apologize for the abruptness of your retrieval. Your actions showed a courage I thought had long since vanished from this galaxy." Lyra swallowed, finding her voice. "I only did what any true historian would do. I released the truth." At that moment, another set of doors hissed open. Valerius was marched into the chamber by his own captors. He saw Kalen, and his face flushed with renewed rage. Then he saw Lyra, standing free, and his eyes narrowed in venomous comprehension. The traitor and her master. He snarled, a fitting pair. Kalen ignored him, his focus remaining on Lyra. "The truth," he mused. "A simple concept, yet one your Concord went to great lengths to bury. Tell me, archivist, as a student of history, what is the customary punishment for the crime of deicide? For the murder of an entire civilization?" Lyra's claws clenched. The question was not for her, but for Valerius. The High Counselor laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Do not try to pin your savagery on us. You attack without provocation. You annihilate our fleet. You hold a knife to the throat of 1 billion innocent souls. And you dare speak of crime? We did not kill you. Your species was weak, consumed by its own internal conflicts. It is the way of the galaxy. The strong survive. The weak become footnotes. Footnotes, Kalen repeated softly, the word dripping with 10 millennia of cold fury. He turned his full attention to Valerius, and for the first time, the counselor felt a flicker of genuine fear. The weariness in the human's eyes was gone, replaced by the unforgiving glare of a judge. You call us weak. We held back the horrors of the void when your ancestors were still learning to write their own names. We forged a covenant, a promise to protect fledgling life, and you were its first signatories. When the scourge came, a tide of ravenous machines from the intergalactic dark, we fought them. We bled for them. We broke them upon the anvil of our worlds. And in our moment of greatest weakness, when we were wounded and exhausted, you did not send aid. You sealed your borders. You declared us a quarantine zone. You built your 10,000-year peace upon the silence of our tomb. Kalen took a step forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You did not simply let us die, counselor. You erased us. You sealed the records, deleted us from the star charts, and taught your children that we were a myth. You committed the greatest crime of all. You murdered our memory. Valerius stood speechless, his manufactured history crumbling before the weight of the human's words. Lyra watched, her heart pounding. This was not a conqueror. This was a man drowning in the ghosts of a trillion dead, and he had finally found the shore upon which to unleash his storm. Kalen turned back to the command throne and gestured. The main view screen flickered, showing a live feed of the chaos on Xylos. You spoke of innocent soul, Kalen said, his voice returning to a cold, measured calm. The last directive of my people is clear. Your government is to be dismantled, your leadership executed, your military capacity sterilized. It would be just. Valerius paled, his defiance finally cracking. You would not. You cannot. I can. Kalen interrupted, the simple statement carrying the weight of absolute power. But I am an archivist. Like her. He nodded toward Lyra. And I find your version of history incomplete. It requires a correction. An addendum. Authored by you. He faced Valerius again, his eyes like chips of ice. The age of your conquered is over. A new order is beginning. An order built not on convenient lies, but on hard and painful truths. And you, High Counselor Valerius of the El Shari, will deliver its inaugural address. Valerius stared, uncomprehending. What are you talking about? Kalen allowed himself a small, grim smile. It did not reach his eyes. I am not going to kill you, Counselor. I am not going to make you a martyr. That would be too kind. No, you are going to live. You are going to stand before a system-wide broadcast, and you are going to tell them everything. You will confess to the betrayal. You will confess to the lies. You will tell the entire galaxy that the peace they have known was bought with the blood of a better people. You will dismantle your own legacy, word by painful word. He turned to his AI. Legion, prepare the broadcast. Ensure it cannot be jammed. The High Counselor has a history lesson to teach. And this time, the entire galaxy will be listening. The broadcast was an act of psychological warfare more devastating than any orbital bombardment. High Counselor Valerius, immaculate in his ceremonial robes but with the haunted eyes of a man forced to read his own obituary, stood on a podium erected in the ruins of the Concord Rotunda. The sky above him was still laced with the fading funeral pyres of his fleet. Kalen was not visible, but his presence was a palpable weight, directing the scene from the Bridge of the Vengeance. The feed was broadcast on every channel, overriding all other signals across the 20 core worlds of the LRE Dominion and beyond, patched into the interstellar hyper relay by Legion's omnipotent digital hand. There was no escape from the confession. Valerius's voice, once a tool of command that could sway senates and launch fleets, was a dry, broken rasp. He read from a datapad, his words devoid of his usual eloquent cadence, each one a stone laid upon the grave of his civilization's honor. He spoke of the Covenant. He spoke of the Scourge War. He spoke of the Terran Directorate's desperate last stand and the Conquered's calculated, cowardly silence. He read the final, desperate transmissions that Lyra had unearthed, his own voice narrating the ultimate betrayal committed by his ancestors. Across 100 worlds, beings watched in stunned disbelief. The foundational myth of their society, the belief that they were the inheritors of a galaxy peacefully abandoned, was being systematically dismantled by their own supreme leader. The silence in the streets of Xylos was absolute, a profound, collective intake of breath from which there could be no recovery. On the Bridge of the Vengeance, Lyra stood beside Kylan, watching the broadcast on the main screen. She felt no triumph, only a deep, aching sadness. "Is this justice?" "High Archivist," she asked softly, her gaze fixed on Valerius's hollowed-out face. To break a people's spirit so completely, Kalen did not take his eyes off the screen. Their spirit was built on a lie, a foundation of sand. "I am not breaking them. I am merely washing away the sand so they can see the bedrock of truth beneath. They cannot build a future until they have truly reckoned with their past." He gestured to a secondary screen displaying data streams from across the Concord. "Look, it's already beginning." The feed showed protests erupting on other core worlds, not against the humans, but against their own governments. Cathar delegates were formally seceding from the Concord Assembly. Several regional fleets were broadcasting messages of neutrality, refusing to engage the human vessel. Valerius's confession had not united them in defiance. It had shattered their faith in the institutions they had been taught to revere. The Conquered was not being conquered. It was dissolving from within. "This is your justice," Lyra pressed. "Chaos, Gnome," Kalen replied, a flicker of something that might have been hope in his eyes. "This is their choice. I have given them the truth. What they choose to do with it is up to them. For 10,000 years, they lived under a single, monolithic power structure. Now they are free to forge their own paths, to make their own covenants. Some will choose wisely. Others will fall into barbarism. But it will be their choice, not one dictated by a high counselor in a distant capital." He paused, his expression hardening as he looked back at Valerius. He, however, does not get a choice. His people will decide his fate. But the era of the Elari Dominion's quiet supremacy is over. When the broadcast ended, Valerius was left standing alone on the podium, a solitary figure in the heart of his broken capital. The human soldiers who had escorted him were gone, teleported away as silently as they had arrived. He was abandoned, left to the judgment of the people he had so profoundly failed. The silence held for a long moment. And then, from the assembled crowds, a single stone was thrown. It was the beginning of an avalanche. On the Vengeance, Kalen turned away from the screen. The sounds of the riot on Xylos muted. The last directive, in its strictest sense, was complete. The leadership of the Conquered was broken, its military shattered, its hegemonic control erased. He had fulfilled his duty to the dead. But as he looked out at the star-dusted void, he felt not the satisfaction of vengeance, but the vast, empty ache of his own solitude. What now? He was the last human, the keeper of a dead culture, the commander of a weapon that could unmake worlds. He could wander the galaxy as a ghost, a vengeful god. But to what end he had corrected the historical record? But he could not rewrite it. He could not bring his people back. It was Lyra who spoke into the silence. "The exile protocol," she said, her voice pulling him from his reverie. It spoke of more than just the betrayal. There were other entries, fragmented and heavily corrupted. It spoke of something called the Sanctuary Protocol, a contingency plan, a final bastion. Kalen turned to her, his historian's curiosity piqued, overriding his sorrow. "I have been through every archive on this vessel. I have lived in the memories of my people for a century. I know of no such protocol." "It was not in your archives," Lyra explained, her claws dancing across a holographic interface she had summoned. "It was a ghost in ours, or a repeating data fragment buried in the subquantum layers of the sealed file. Something your people must have embedded in our networks during the final days. It was a breadcrumb trail, too subtle for our ancestors to notice. It's a set of coordinates, but they make no sense. They point to a region of space beyond the galactic rim, in the Great Void." Kalen stared at the coordinates, his mind racing. The Great Void between galaxies was considered utterly lifeless, a desert of unimaginable scale. To send a colony mission, there would have been suicide, unless they weren't using conventional travel. Legion's calm voice filled the bridge. "The coordinates correspond to a theoretical endpoint for a trans-dimensional rift, stabilized by a sustained singularity. The power expenditure would be astronomical. It would require the energy of a captured star." Kalen's breath caught in his throat. He remembered the Directorate's most ambitious, most secret project, the Star Forge, a Dyson sphere built not for power, but to manipulate the very fabric of space-time. It had been declared a failure, lost in the final days of the war. "The Scourge," he whispered. "They didn't just attack our colonies. They were driving for our core, for Saul." He looked at Lyra, a wild, impossible hope dawning in his eyes for the first time in 10,000 years. They weren't trying to conquer Earth. They were trying to stop us from leaving. The path forward was no longer a question of vengeance, but of pilgrimage. The game was over, and a new one was beginning. Kalen looked at Lyra, the Cathar archivist who had chosen truth over loyalty, who had seen the humanity in the monster at her door. "Your people, the Cathar," he said. "They valued the Covenant. Your records show they argued against the quarantine." "We are a people of history, High Archivist," Lyra replied. "We honor our debts. It is a shame my ancestors allowed themselves to be overruled. Perhaps their descendants can rectify that mistake," Kalen said, a true, small smile touching his lips. "I am setting a course for the Great Void. I am going to see if this sanctuary is real. This vessel, the Vengeance, its purpose is fulfilled, but a new purpose may be waiting for all of us." He extended a hand. "The galaxy is about to be reborn in chaos. It will need keepers of history. It will need those who remember the lessons of the past. Will you help me write the next chapter? Archivist Lyra." Lyra looked from the human's outstretched hand to the view of the stars, a new, uncharted future unfolding before her. The Concord was dead. Long live whatever came next. She placed her clawed hand in his. "I will," she said. The Ark ship Vengeance, the ghost of a murdered civilization, turned its nose away from the shattered heart of the old galaxy. It did not move with the flash of engines, but with a silent, deliberate shift of reality. Its course set for the endless night between galaxies. It was no longer just a vessel of retribution, but an ark of hope, carrying the last human and the first of a new generation of allies on a final, desperate quest to find a home they weren't even sure existed. The silence of the Phalanx had been answered by the voice of the past, and now that voice was seeking its future in the dark.